Welcome to Mental Health Without Borders, the Global Wellness Podcast with Dr. Lindsay Frey, where we dive into the complexities of mental health from a global perspective, exploring how different cultures approach wellness and what we can learn from one another. Whether you're a mental health professional, someone passionate about wellness, or just curious about the world's diverse approaches to mental well-being, this podcast offers valuable insights you won't want to miss. This episode is sponsored by Finding Hope Wellness Center in Tampa, Florida, where individuals, families, and couples can go to receive hope and healing for their mental health. Go to www.findinghopewellnesscenter.com to find out more. Now let's get started. In this episode of Mental Health Without Borders, I'm honored to welcome Tony Parmenter, a gifted trauma therapist, international trainer, and creator of the innovative TF-EMDR model, which combines therapeutic fly fishing with evidence-based trauma therapy. Tony brings a deeply human and creative lens to the work of healing, drawing from his experiences living between southern Vermont and Tokyo, Japan. His passion for helping first responders, veterans, artists, and spiritually curious individuals shines through in every part of this conversation. Welcome, Tony. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you. And so I wanted to start by just asking if you can tell us a little bit about your story or your journey, what led you into the world of therapy and your passion for helping people heal from trauma.
Sure. I never know where to start with this because I feel like, the journey was always happening, It's like, yeah, I'll start with being in the military. So I joined the military in the summer of 2001. And that time it was pre 9/11. I joined to basically kind of, in whatever way I could, kind of get on with my life. I was kind of just, I'd worked a lot of jobs. I dropped out of college already. And my dad had encouraged me to kind of check out the military. And I didn't want to. Kind of like philosophically, I was like, I don't want to like go fight people. But I guess if I have to, I'll join the Air Force. Like they're less likely to fight people. So I joined the Air Force and wanted to get on with college and do all those things, like work for a certain number of years and then go to college and get on with my life. And while I was in the middle of waiting to go to basic training, 9/11 happened and the whole kind of focus of being in the military changed. And so when I was in basic training, I was the only person that wasn't there to kind of more or less kind of get revenge. Everyone had kind of a very focused agenda, and I was just kind of there to do whatever I could to get on with my life. So that kind of was my focus moving through the military from there. But I ended up going to Japan. And my second weekend there, I got in trouble with these two other guys. We went out and we didn't know that. Well, one guy was supposed to be the designated driver for people. And we didn't know that he was drinking and he was underage. And we all got in trouble because he was underage. And that started for me a process of like really deep reflection. And I had to go to counseling. It was my first experience going to counseling. I had to go to group counseling for a couple sessions. And then they sent me to like this deployment to kind of get me out of the way because they, were really embarrassed about that, the group I worked with. So kind of that starting the process for me, I started to notice just through my own reflection how lots of different people around me were really suffering in their own ways, whether it was like the expectations of the system. When you're new in the military, everyone goes out and drinks all the time, but people also get in trouble for that. And just the lifestyle wasn't very supportive for people with families. Families were breaking up. People had lots of trauma. I didn't even know what to call it back then, but it was definitely lots of trauma. People coming in with trauma, people coming in from poverty and all these places where the military was like their escape for them. And in a lot of ways, it wasn't. It just kind of continued the suffering that they already had and actually, increased it for some people. So I was in the military. I did the best I could to get through. I really liked my job. I liked my coworkers. I met my wife along the way. We were playing music. We were in a band. And when I got out of the military, I wanted to stay in Japan. We were married and I lived there on a marriage visa and I taught English. And I still needed to finish my bachelor's degree. I had done some education in the Air Force and I hadn't finished all my education that I needed to live in Japan at that time, be an English teacher. So I was using the GI Bill and doing some online education to finish that up. And I decided to focus on behavioral science more than education. I just needed a bachelor's degree in something, and that seemed more interesting. So along the way, part of the requirements of that was that I had to do some volunteer service hours, like 1,000 hours of volunteering, somewhere, and write a paper on that. And so I found in Tokyo where I was living, there was the English crisis line called Tokyo English Lifeline. And it's now like a very big mental health agency. But back then it was like a little bit of outpatient and a crisis line. And so I trained on that and became one of the crisis counselors. And I realized I really liked teaching. I liked the interpersonal stuff about teaching. I liked the relationship, the one on one stuff with teaching and having fun. I taught through playing games. But counseling felt like I was able to do what I really liked about teaching more and actually help people with bigger things than just learning English, like work through stuff. And at that point too, I was also doing some crisis counseling with a lot of people that were stationed there working for the government because if you're in the military, you're really reluctant to use your own resources that you have because you're always afraid of information getting back to the wrong people. So people would call our lifeline for all kinds of things, even if most of the time not suicidal, just having stress in other ways. So when I finished my degree, I was really thinking, I should do this. Like, I have GI Bill money. I have a way to support me getting an education still. I should try to do this instead of teaching. So we found a way to kind of make that work. We moved to New England where I'd never lived before. I went to school. And while I was here, I had to get a part-time job. So I got it in my local mental health hospital, which is called the Brattleboro Retreat. And they had at that time just started an outpatient program, like a partial outpatient, semi-residential program for uniformed services folks. And it was really innovative. They were doing all mindfulness-based stuff, acceptance and commitment therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, a lot of experiential things. And I was working in the children's unit and kind of got folded into them also. And so that gave me like a really neat way to make a new connection to like the veteran community. I had never lived in the US as a veteran before. So make a connection to that, make a connection to the first responder world. And also some of the things that I was learning about myself in Japan, kind of in the more Buddhist realm, I was actually able to figure out, oh, I can do this as a therapist too, like using mindfulness. Acceptance and commitment therapy is, I always tell people that is like the Western people stole Buddhism and just put their own words and made it scientific. I felt really like plugged into this whole group of people kind of that I had something to do with. My dad was also in the military when I was a kid, so I felt like I had, some knowledge about where they were coming from, some lived experience. But also I felt like I was really growing as a person too, growing as a therapist, growing as an individual, kind of through all the therapy techniques that I was learning while I was in grad school by working there. And so we planned to move back to Japan after that. We ended up staying here in southern Vermont. And just along the way, I've always stayed connected to different ways, setting up peer support programs for one job or working. I worked the employee assistance program for the state and worked with a lot of first responders. I've always stayed plugged into that group, even if I'm doing other things. And now, as an EMDR therapist, at that program that I worked at the retreat, that's where I got into fly fishing. We had a mindfulness based fly fishing program that we would do. So, like, taking that stuff that I knew from there and plugging it into trauma therapy that really works for people, that's very person-centered. EMDR therapy can be very person-centered for people and very compassionate. Like, people don't need to tell you their whole story. It's a very compassionate way to work with people who have trauma, especially cops and people that were in the military, because they don't wanna talk about that to you, and they're afraid of that getting somewhere, or it's just too much to talk about that. So, anyway, getting to where I am now, to where I'm doing a lot of my work either with that population or outside, I feel like I've taken my whole journey with me and I'm kind of keeping that going. So it's kind of nice. So I do go back to Japan every couple years and I do have clients in Japan. We work it out, to make sure we're working with all the legal things, working outside in other places. But, it's nice to be able to go there. I'll do intensives with people while I'm there. Haven't done any trainings yet in Japan, but that's on the schedule maybe for next summer to do some fly fishing trainings there. So, yeah, and then I do some trainings here in the US with therapists and therapeutic fly fishing with EMDR. So,
And
yeah.
so you're training the therapist to do EMDR fly fishing.
Yeah, so I have a 3-day, well, it's a 15-hour over 3 days training, and then there's 6 months of consultation afterwards to train people in doing that. And it's approved by Andrea for credits. I've got continuing education credits for psychologists and mental health counselors, and MFTs and social workers also, and it's fun. It's usually retreat style. So we usually the last 2 years we've done it in an inn that has like a nice like restaurant that's really close to where we want to go fly fishing, and we'll have someone come in and do yoga nidra. And one of the things that I try to it's a very low on the academic scale as far as training goes. It's more experiential, and we try to like have it be very regulated the whole time. So that when people are doing this with clients, they're coming from a very deep kind of nervous system perspective and using the five senses, using certain things about the natural environment that can help kind of regulate the vagus nerve into a sense of safety to kind of have that enhance what they're doing with their clients in nature. So if they're fly fishing or not, they still have a good way to do all the work they want to do with people.
Yeah, it sounds like amazing work and such a different way to bring about trauma healing, like healing from past trauma.
Yeah.
And you were right. You have taken every experience that you've had and just continuously built upon that to create what you've created today. So that's incredible because of the perspectives that you have and the places that you've been in and what you've taken from them, and you're using that to help. I mean, that's wonderful. And you do have this international perspective. And do you see differences in the way that mental health and healing are treated from the Japan perspective, the
Oh, yeah.
US perspective, and just even places you've lived in the US?
It's changed. It's really changed in Japan over the last 20 years since the time I moved there in 2002. So between then and now, it's really changed a lot, but it's still very heavily stigmatized. Knowledge about different therapies out there for mental health are is really low. If someone has depression or anxiety, they're more likely, if they do anything at all, to go get medication for that, and it's very secretive. But I think the younger crowd, just like in the States here, the younger crowd is more open to doing things in the therapy realm, but there's really not a lot of options. Public health insurance is what people use to pay for their health in Japan, and it doesn't cover mental health. So it's a pretty big cost for most people, when they're used to paying, a few dollars for going to the doctor. And also, like, there is an EMDR association in Japan, but there's not a lot of places for people to get trained. Like, there's psychologists, and counseling is kind of new in Japan, but there's not a lot of places for people to go get trained, and then not a lot of ways for people to they have to kind of go abroad to get trained in these other therapies that might really work for people, like EMDR or, IFS or DBT. The general public's knowledge is really not that great either. So, I guess when people have challenges in Japan, they're more likely to try to handle it themselves. And, this is also my perspective. I'm not Japanese, so this is me speaking from my perspective. And I hope if I'm wrong in any way, someone tells me I'm wrong. I feel like the kind of group mentality, which is very helpful in a lot of ways, is not helpful for when people have emotional problems because they feel different and ostracized. And they're stuffing that away to try to conform to the group and not look like they're suffering or not being a burden on other people, or they're just completely ostracized and cut away. So there's a lot of mental health problems in Japan, and there's this thing, I'm not sure if you've heard of it in Japan, they call it nito. It's kind of like a failure to launch. That might be how what we call it in the States. But in Japan, you kind of live with your parents until you get married. That's how it's always been and it's changing, but it's kind of how it still is for a lot of people. And people that have attachment trauma that maybe were bullied or something that have a lot of childhood trauma and they're isolating, they build a lot of resentment too, and that gets in the way of them getting out and being a part of the world. And they just kind of stay in their house. And, their parents, because culturally, you stay in your house till you get married, the parents end up taking care of them even when they're really old. And, it's creating kind of a really big stress on society there. And then people don't actually know what to do with it in Japan. There is a really great form of therapy that came from Japan that is helpful for a lot of folks. And that's called Morita therapy. And if you were to look at it, it looks kind of like acceptance and commitment therapy. But a lot of people who do it actually do it in like a communal setting. So kind of like a residential setting.
Very interesting. Morita?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of it myself.
Yeah. There's a couple books written on it in English. There's this guy named Ogawa. He's a Japanese American and he's written a few books on it. But it's not very popular in the States, but it's kind of like acceptance and commitment therapy. It's kind of Buddhist infused.
Mhm. Yeah,
philosophically.
I
Yeah.
understand, and it's interesting as you talk about that too, because we've taken on some wellness practices from over there that help us, and some things that they do, but that hasn't necessarily translated back to, I guess, helping with healing and trauma and some of the things that they might experience. And then you add the fact that there's low availability and then high cost and a risk of stigma. And so those are factors that are going to be really harmful for people wanting to seek help. I've talked to a couple of therapists that also work with a lot of Asian clients that say that their virtual therapy has been very helpful just for people that don't want to be seen walking into a physical building, that they're really
Yeah.
grateful for that option.
Yeah, I actually, when I work with people in Japan, they're either foreigners living there or they're Japanese who speak English really well enough to do therapy. Maybe they've lived abroad and working with me in the US, which is at night for them, is more convenient and possible for them than trying to find a doctor or a therapist, even if it costs more for them just because of the difference in economies. It's
Absolutely. And
more
they might
workable
not be
for
able
them.
to take off, right? Or be able to take a break or be able to be honest about what they would have to do if it's during the work hours.
Oh, yeah, and especially if you have a real job, quote unquote, you can't take time off for that, really, there's no way. So people do things on the weekends, you know? Yeah,
The weekends and
yeah,
evenings. Yeah, well, I'm glad that you're still able to help individuals over there. And again, with the virtual option, that's really fantastic. And
yeah,
I do want to go back to the fly fishing therapy approach. So you came up with TF-EMDR. That right?
yeah.
That was yours. And so why do you think it works so well for people who've been through either tough experiences or their own trauma? What is it about that approach?
Yeah. Well, when I started this, my perspective on this has really changed just in the last few years. So when I started this, the thought was that I've experienced, at least in the first responder and veteran world, through doing mindfulness based fly fishing, seeing people really willing to show up and that like being different enough for them to show up. Showing up in an office is really hard. There's just too many factors about it that are difficult and stigmatizing for people in that peripheral. So in the beginning, the EMDR that way on the river or outside didn't look like therapy. And for the first few times I was doing it with people, I'd have people come back to a session and they'd say, I really would like to work on something today. I'd really like to do therapy. Maybe we don't do fly fishing. And I'd have to remind them, actually, you're feeling well enough to say this right now. We've been doing EMDR this whole time. Remember we talked about that? And they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right. So that was kind of where it started, that it was different enough to engage this sector of people that really needed help, but were not able to kind of, whether for work or stigma or whatever reasons, not want to go to an office. But right now, I'm doing it with so many kinds of people, and I've trained 20 plus therapists the last few years. Small group, but like we're spread out around the country enough that we're working with all kinds of people. I don't work with just first responders. I'm working with all kinds of people. And what I've noticed is that it's not just about it looking different. It's about what you actually can do outside that's different. Whereas, earlier I was talking about how just feeling the five senses differently and what that does in your nervous system. The sound of the water in that frequency range of moving water on like a fly fishable river is within the same sound frequency range that our ear muscles are attuned to when our body is in a safe state. So having that continuous sound is really regulating for the body. And so that just makes it possible to do a lot of different things. You can do anything out there just because the person, unless they're really averse to being outside, there is a lot of people who just don't want to be outside. But, if a person is open to that, their body's going to be in a very regulated state. It's free to do whatever you want. So in my sessions, I might be doing something that's art therapy ish with the material that are around us, using different things around that you can see and feel as metaphors for something, or doing parts work, IFS kind of stuff. You have so many things around you that can represent a part of you or an attachment figure that you can then take inside and bring home. There's just so many different ways to use being outside. If you're in a four walled office, you have to kind of have all your stuff there, and that limits people. You might have a great play therapy office with like thousands of figures around, but that's still limiting for some people. And so That's amazing, and one thing I've really noticed is that the way that people process can be really different. So, if you know anything about EMDR or your listeners know anything, when someone's laying down on a couch or sitting in a chair and processing, they're sometimes have very physical experiences. Sometimes, like, your body's really moving. You're having big, strong emotions, and that's helpful. Outside, I notice that less just because there's so many different things kind of taxing the body at the same time. You have the moving water, the wind, you're moving a rod, you're thinking. People do have strong emotional experiences, but that happens less. But the thing about that is that people also process really fast. So it's just, I don't know. I also like doing therapy inside, especially in the winter. And there's great experiences that happen that way. But when it's possible to be outside with like the right kind of person, it really makes a big difference. And my experience says that. We haven't done any research studies on that. So I'm just going to say that. That's all through experience.
I think that there is absolutely something to that. I mean, I talked about this in another episode, but sometimes I'll do a grounding technique in the office, and then I'll take kiddos outside in the back of the office. That's just beautiful nature. And then ask them to feel and see the difference. 5 things you can touch and see and hear and smell, taste. And they will immediately go, "It's so calming out here. It's so different out here." And these are
Yeah.
kiddos that, well, you could do this in your backyard. You could just walk outside. So it's something I've incorporated even in my coping techniques, is that if you get really upset, really angry, take a walk outside, go to your backyard, get a chair, just sit and breathe out there, because I've noticed that it makes a big difference even with my young children that I work with. And I was also talking to the Italian-based therapist, Camilla Gamba from Milan, and she was talking about how she incorporates both walk and talk therapy, and then also she has a physical office. But if somebody is stuck, like they're emotionally stuck, then she goes, "All right, you're a great candidate for walk and talk." And so she will see them open up in a different way than they do in the physical.
Yeah, I think you don't have to be going to the forest. You don't have to be making some epic journey to do nature-based therapy. You can do it on the sidewalk or in a backyard because you're outside breathing air, and there's all these things that you're experiencing, even walking. So in EMDR, we call walking the form of bilateral stimulation. You're moving your body back and forth and stimulating your left and right hemisphere at the same time. And not only is that like regulating for your body because you're moving, but when you're going for a run or going for a walk on your own, like most people have like really crazy ideas. Like we solve all the world's problems while we're out for a walk. We forget those a lot of times. It's a natural state that our body can process and move information, physical information, mental information really easily. So, yeah, if anyone's listening to this and you don't have a way to get out to go to a state park or a park or whatever to be out in nature, just get out on the sidewalk with your clients and see what difference that makes for them. It's amazing.
I agree. And also, if you're a listener and you don't even have a therapist, like as we're talking about this, how important it is to incorporate this in your day to day. It's something that you could literally start tomorrow. If you've been feeling stuck, if you've been feeling stressed or overwhelmed, take a walk every day. Take 2 walks, get one out in the morning and go in the evening, and see if you can tell a difference in how you're feeling, what you're thinking about, what your stress level is. Because you're right, just the simplicity of just getting outside and taking a walk, or just getting outside and sitting and breathing there, can make a huge difference. Whether you have access to mental health or not, everybody can typically get outside somewhere and do a little bit of work on their own.
Yeah, one of the big blows to a lot of people's mental health right now is just our sedentary lifestyle. So if you get outside and you're moving and that's good, your LDLs are going to be down. It's like you're going to have better cholesterol, better blood sugar. That helps out with your kind of baseline stress level too. You're going to be a
Yes,
healthier person.
exactly. So much better. Exactly. And so let's do that. Let's make it more of an active approach to taking care of ourselves, our minds, and our bodies, realizing how they are all integrated, and how simple changes we can make in our life can make a big difference as long as we're consistent with it. And so I wanted to ask you about your work, because you've mentioned working with veterans, first responders, and artists, and you work with a lot of different kinds of people. But what have you learned from these groups about the way that people heal from pain or trauma?
Isolating is one of the biggest things that makes healing from trauma difficult and actually kind of creates worse suffering. And I'm saying this as an introvert. I like to isolate. Like I feel good when I'm just kind of in my cocoon. But we also we evolved from and somehow just needing to, be in a fight or flight state all the time, our nervous system evolved to needing to connect to people and feeling safe. And so it's really important to kind of have that in a person's picture. And a lot of times, I live in a rural state, so you can't just go out and meet people. A lot of times people are kind of stuck on their own somewhere in like a small country house. How can you find people that know what you've been through or can relate to what you've been through? So I think that peer support makes a big difference. And there are formal peer support programs out there. There's first responder peer support program, there's Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, there's all kinds of formal programs where people that have been through similar things can relate. Other people in their life might not relate on. There's also so many informal ways. Like, can you find a group of people to hike with? And when you're hiking with one or two people and, just start talking, might they have some of the same experiences as you? So I think that's like something that I've seen apply around. And, with nature based therapy, we're getting out, we're outside together already. So that's kind of like getting things moving. And I'm always trying to find a way to encourage my people to connect, the clients I work with to connect with other people. A lot of times where I live, it's online, different online groups that have formed up around people that have similar struggles, addiction struggles, things like that. Then again, there's the non traditional ways. And if you can't just being outside or doing something creative, doing something that's good for the nervous system, being as healthy as you can.
Mhm. Yes, I think that's so true too. It's just we start to isolate. We don't even realize it sometimes until it's so late or it's so down the road or we're not getting the calls anymore. But making sure you're staying connected with people. And I think it can normalize experiences, like you said. And I have seen so much power in that and just normalizing what somebody's going through, even if it's not the exact same situation. It's a feeling, it's something that they can draw on from. And so I think you're right that we've got to support one another and just getting together, having those conversations is important, and I think we've seen the importance of that post COVID because it's our first isolating experience as a in the world, and I think that
Yeah.
we've had to go through. We were forced to kind of be alone, and we saw all the detrimental side effects that came from having to isolate during COVID, and so we saw that on a global stage. So on a personal level, it's just as damaging and harmful to just kinda do life completely on your own, based on what you've been through. I understand sometimes it can make you feel safer, and it can be more of a controlled environment, and you know what to expect every day, but if there's somebody listening that is isolating a little bit, just having 1 connection, 2 connections, or like you said, if it's too hard or difficult, either emotionally or physically to get out, then try to connect with people in groups and see how you can do that or reconnect with friends that might be from other places online.
And I think for a lot of people, it's maybe not a group like having a friend to call, and that's helpful. But some people find a lot of meaning connecting to like a higher purpose. Like maybe their part of their healing is connecting to a cause that both helps other people, but also kind of helps them feel like they're getting a sense of meaning. So that's something that I see a lot of people do too. Like their own healing helps them. That goes back into like Erickson's like stages of development, especially people that are like me in my 40s. Like we're starting to get into that mode of like wanting to nurture and help the people that are coming up. And so to see people plug into that and really get a bigger sense of meaning, like that's better for their recovery.
Mhm.
And yeah,
Absolutely. How do you see that? How do you see the intersect between either spirituality or beliefs or connecting to a higher power? How do you see that connected with the healing process work?
that's a really great question for me. I grew up in kind of pretty fundamental Protestant kind of world. So growing up, I had my own idea of what spirituality is. But like over kind of my life, and especially being a therapist, seeing kind of what spirituality means to everybody in kind of different ways. But the thing that's the same for that is when someone's having a real spiritual experience or they're growing, it's enhancing something deep about them. They're really connecting to something deep and they feel that. And there's different ways to explain that through different religions or different ways of thought about what that is for a person. But like you can be sitting in church with 100 people, and those people that are having spiritual experiences are actually having completely different experiences. So I've found in my work that trauma healing on its own can really connect a person to some deep, authentic part of themselves that maybe they've never felt before. And maybe through growing up, if they have complex trauma, growing up in an abusive family or growing up in an area where there's just lots of dangerous conflict or abuse, parts of themselves have to really jump in into the picture and protect them. And that means that other parts of themselves, like maybe parts that like to play or parts that like to feel really deeply about things, they never get to be a part of that person's development. And so in trauma therapy, to reconnect to those, it's like you kind of get younger and you get this like life force back or life force that maybe you never got to connect to. And it can really change like a person's feeling or perspective on their life or even what they do with their life. And then that also influences the people around you. And, you know, and there's like the ripple effect of connection. And people have their own different ways to make sense of it, depending on where they're coming from or what the language they have around that is. But the kind of living authentically, and actually my company name is Seiyu, Institute for Health and Training, and Seiyu is like a mixture of like my kids' names and Japanese kanji. They're both Japanese citizens, so it's a mixture of their kanji from their names. And actually, people don't really say this word that way in Japan much, but like translates to being sincere. And I've always thought like sincerity, integrity, like those have something on the surface that people see, but they're all about authenticity. So like I've even named my company after that actually, you know. So
Yes, I know. Say it again just so that people can hear you and they know where to
oh
find you.
the company name is Seiyu, Seiyu, Seiyu Institute for Health and Training. And so and we do mental health and I also, set it up to also be able to do training. So we do that and I'm making some courses. So yeah, anyway, that's that.
Mhm. Great, wonderful, and we'll have everything in the show notes too, just so that people know where to find you. And just to kind of finish up, you balance a lot. So you've got family, you've got children, you've got creative projects, you've got training, you've got your own independent work with people, and then you've got the fly fishing. So how do you take care of your own mental health and well-being and your own wellness? What are some of your own practices?
Yeah. Well, I'll say the hardest thing about that for me is like finding the time to do that. And how I do that is, because I have kind of limited time, one of the motivators for me to do fly fishing and work was like, okay, well, I get to fly fish then. Like, I'm actually going to be in a place that's good for me. And I'm also like a good therapist when I'm in that state. When I'm in a safe, regulated state, there's neuroception, which means, our nervous systems we're connecting to other people when there's co regulation. We can get more into that sciencey stuff later. When I'm doing good, I'm a better therapist for my clients, but then I'm just better anyway. I'm more healthy. So that's part of being able to organize this is a little bit selfish because then I get to feel better. So, but being outside, being by water, I'm a musician and trying to find ways to do that the most. These days, I have a drum set in my barn and I just go out there and I put headphones in and as best as I can, I just try to play along and really loud. But spending time with my family, traveling, I feel really great when I'm traveling. So getting out and driving long distances or flying somewhere. I do a lot of work in Iowa because I have an office there too. So, actually like a big part of being able to go out there is just being in the airport and being on the planes. I feel very at peace when I'm in airports.
I know, it's strange, I do too. People think it's the weirdest thing, but I enjoy the entirety of the travel process, literally from getting there until I get to my destination and back. That is a huge part of my self-care, so I can relate.
I'm the dad that gets to the airport like too early, like 5 hours early. But once I'm there, like everything's fine. I think part of that is like I just want to be there. It's
Yes.
all.
Be there and we are not missing this flight
Yeah,
for anything.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, even when my son was younger, we would always get there 2 or 3 hours early, and we would sit and we would have a meal, and we would just relax for a little bit. So, he loves traveling too, but I think because I've really made a concerted effort for it to be a really fun, really relaxing process, we've kind of always done the same kind of things.
It's so fun. Next year, we're going to back to Japan next summer, and my brother-in-law lives in Singapore now, so we're gonna go visit him, and my son is so excited, and I'm excited too. I didn't know what Singapore's airport was like. They have a giant waterfall in the airport.
I have heard that. Yes, I
Like,
did. I recently
we're
heard
super.
that.
Yeah, we're so excited to go to Singapore, like, partially because of the airport, you know? So
Yes, I've seen videos of their airport. Like, it is a
yeah,
thing, and not only that, I've one of the Asian-based therapists I was talking to was talking about the so many things that Singapore is doing right, but I just had no idea with, like, their communities and their wellness and having these outdoor spaces and places for people to connect and then also for people to be active and encouraging
yeah.
that, and so that's
Well,
great. You're gonna have a
it's
great trip.
Yeah, it's a really small island and there's, I don't know how many millions of people that live there. So there's very little there's no parks except for what they create. So I'm looking forward to seeing that too, how they intentionally build in those spaces.
Good. Well, that's great, and I've enjoyed hearing about your insights. I hope you have an amazing trip, and I hope to stay connected. There's so much that I've learned from you from talking with you, and I think too with therapists that wanna try these different approaches, encouraging them to reach out if you're interested in this. I could see a lot of people wanting to somehow incorporate it, but learning from someone that has such great experience with it. So, the last thing I would ask you is, for people around the world who are struggling or they're trying to heal or they have past trauma, what encouragement would you give them or words of wisdom do you think that they should be able to hear today?
Things will get better. The world is in a really tough place right now, and a lot of people are really suffering, and many people wake up very scared every day. But things will get better, and it will get better because we are sticking together, and the more we trust each other, the more things will get better. Just stick with it and stay with it every day and do the best that you can to be a healthy person and love the people around you.
Yes, I think that's fantastic, and I appreciate it. And I thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming on today and for sharing your words of wisdom. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too. I appreciate you inviting me, and I can't wait to stay connected.
Yes, absolutely. So, thank you so much for joining me today on Mental Health Without Borders. And for the listeners, this has been such an incredible conversation that I hope you've taken some valuable insights from this conversation that you can then to apply to your life. So, remember, no matter where you are in the world or where you come from, your mental wellness truly matters. So, be kind to yourself. And I look forward to connecting with you next time on Mental Health Without Borders.